Untitled Chapter. See if we can get through chapters 10 through 14 today. And let me begin with a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for this pretty day out there. Thanks for gathering us around your word, a word that sometimes befuddles us, mystifies us even, but certainly inspires us and is the very grounding of our relationship with you as you speak to us through your word Jesus. And so be with us now. Bless all of our conversation, all of our learning. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you for those who are here, and thank you if you're watching online. This is Monday afternoon, and you'll probably be Tuesday. We're going to pick up with chapter 10, and I'm going to butcher lots of pronunciations here. So if there's any Hebrew scholars watching, just be gracious here, be nice. So here goes. Everybody with me here? Genesis chapter 10, I'll start us off. These are the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Children were born to them after the flood. The descendants of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. The descendants of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and you'll see that surname a lot, Ashkenazi, right? Or even a whole class of the Ashkenazi Jews. Ribhath and Togarmah. The descendants of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kedem, and Rodanim. From these, the coastland people spread. These are the descendants of Japheth in their lands with their own language. Remember that little phrase, with their own language, by their families in their nations. The descendants of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka. The descendants of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. Cush became the father of Nimrod. He was the first on earth to become a mighty warrior. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad, all of them in the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-er, Calah, and Rezin. Between Nineveh and Calah there is a great city. Egypt became the father of Ludum, Anamin, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, and Pathrasim, Casluhim, and Caphtorim, from which the Philistines came. Canaan became the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Archites, the Sinites, the Archvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites spread abroad, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the descendants of Ham, by their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. To Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, and the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The descendants of Shem, Elam, Asur, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram, Uz, Hol, Kether, and Mash. Arpachshad became the father of Shelah, and Shelah became the father of Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan became the father of Almadad, Shalep, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadarem, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Adbeel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the descendants of Joktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Mashah in the direction of Sephar, the hill country of the east. These are the descendants of Shem by their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the families of Noah's sons, according to their genealogies and their nations. And from these the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood.
You read that.
Not one Smith or Jones in the whole mix there. I don't know what's going on with that. But, you know, there was an old stand-up comic routine where the army sergeant's going through the roll, and his name's like this, you know, it's all these tough, difficult ethnic names, and finally he gets to somebody named Smith, and he goes, "Oh, God bless you, Smith," you know, he's butchering all these names. And someone whose name was always mispronounced when they called the roll for the first time in class, you know, I had to always tell the teacher how to pronounce my name. You know, it was rare. Don't take these lineages literally, okay? Because, well, they don't make any sense, some of them. So, for instance, Ham's, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Hittites lived in what we would call present-day Turkey, Asia Minor sort of area. These peoples are not ethnically related. There's no relationship between. I mean, you know, we know that. So, you know, shove that aside for just a moment. Verse 9, that interesting phrase, "Therefore it is said," that was kind of a popular adage, an expression or a designation. Nineveh, and where will we encounter Nineveh again? Jonah, right, yeah, we'll encounter Nineveh again, that mighty city, 5 days to walk across, of course it was ridiculous. Canaan, these were the Canaanites, ancestors of the various peoples around Palestine, so we'll encounter them again, of course. Sidon, Phoenicia, the Phoenicians would be an enemy of the Israelites, and that's a port. Sidon's a port on the Lebanese coast. The Jebusites were a pre-Israelite group of people. They were the inhabitants of the Jerusalem area. So what's the point of all this? I mean, right, this long genealogy, which is more of a biblical genealogy than it is a historical genealogy. At first, it's showing that all the descendants, all the peoples are coming from Noah's 3 sons. All right, so everybody's descended from Noah's 3 sons.
And according to my Bible, they were all sons. So how does that work?
Yeah, like read these, right, and there begs the question, Kathy, where did the women come from for these sons to marry? And you can see how male-dominated this whole thinking is, too. And second, Walter Brueggemann and the writers of one of my reference books I've been using, A Theological Introduction to the Old Testament. It's by Bruce Birch, Walter Brueggemann, Terence Fredheim, and David Peterson. He asserts that the ordering of these peoples in this international community is a witness to God's continuing creative work. God's continuing creative work. So in other words, we don't worship a watchmaker God. We don't worship a God who said, okay, let's create the universe and wind it all up and set it here, and God proceeds to nap for a few millennia. You know, not that kind of God, but a God that is active in history, and even maybe more importantly, or as part of that, a God that is relational. A God that is relational. We'll see that, of course, later. Any questions, sort of, about this? Okay. Just point out here, so the world of chapter 10, and sometimes chapter 10 is called the Table of the Nations. The Table of the Nations. The world of chapter 10. So to the north, it presses up against Armenia, Asia Minor, Turkey, right? They don't know of anything beyond that. To the east would be Iran, Persia. To the south, Arabia, Ethiopia. I mean, so they wouldn't know about South Africa. To the west, Libya and Crete. So don't talk about Europe or England or, of course, the whole Western Hemisphere. So that's the world of chapter 10. All right. So let's go on to 11. And would somebody like to read and stop at 26? Guy, would you want to?
Okay. The Tower of Babel. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And they migrated from the east. They came upon a plain on the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they all have one language. This is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. These are the descendants of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after the birth of Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after the birth of Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. And Shelah lived after the birth of Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg. And Eber lived after the birth of Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu. And Peleg lived after the birth of Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 31 years, he became the father of Shurag. And Reu lived after the birth of Shurag 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shurag had lived 30 years, he became the father of Nahor. And Shurag lived after the birth of Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah. And Nahor lived after birth of Tara 219 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran.
Yes, thank you, Guy. Good job with those names. Yeah. Now, remember back in chapter 10, we talked about it when they were going through those three sons, they would say, "and their languages." Hold it a minute. I mean, 11 almost seems a little bit out of order, doesn't it? I mean, if everybody's speaking their own languages back in 10, well, now here's the story about, why. I mean, it's what's called an origin story. If you look at Wikipedia, right, Wikipedia would tell you this is an origin story out of the Bible. And any biblical scholar would agree with that it's sort of answering the question, well, why are there so many languages around the world, right? But there's, of course, a much more negative spin here. So what's the problem, or can I put it this way, what's the human failure in this? Or do you see a human failure in it?
It's out of order.
I'm sorry, but...
The story is out of order. Maybe it should be earlier, before...
Well, yeah, it's out of order, absolutely. But let's just take this story now in and of itself, the story of the Tower of Babel. What's the human failure in that story?
Well, it's saying that if you have all one language so that everybody can work together, they can do, nothing will be impossible for them. So Does that mean they become collectively as powerful as God?
Okay, I mean, it kind
Yeah.
of has a smell of arrogance here,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
Almost worshiping that tower.
You know, unity for,
I said they're almost worshiping that tower, they're so
Yeah.
positive.
yeah, unity and power becomes what they're after. But I mean, I was in CVS yesterday, and there was a woman who only spoke Spanish, and nobody else around spoke Spanish, and she was having a dickens of a time with this cashier. They were trying, you know, she didn't understand why there was going to be this much, you know, they were going on and on and on, and you could see the language was such an impediment for the understanding, right? And we probably all had, that was just a very simple illustration of that difficulty when we have the language problems, not even to mention the cultural things that go with that. So yeah, there's a smell of like a self-focus here, almost in opposition to God's earlier commands to go fill the earth. Right? We get it in Genesis 1, later in Genesis 9, go fill the earth. And like, no, we're going to build this tower, and we're going to pull in, and we're going to have power, and we're going to be all unified and figured out. However, is there anything wrong with unity? What did we say? E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Right? Out of all these immigrant groups that came into this country, one. Is there anything wrong with that? I mean, that the whole tension between unity and diversity. What do you think in those?
Well, certainly a united group is able to do more things. They can build cities, for example, or
Okay.
you know, have some people farm and other people do other work.
All right.
But even maybe having unity, they still could fight among themselves. You know, I mean, you want to do something, and I don't want to do it the way you're doing it, you know, but you and I are having the same language and stuff like that, so we're looking at doing the same job, but I have a different way of doing it from what you want to do it. So I mean, even having unity doesn't mean that you're going to get along well.
Okay. Okay. Joe?
You know, I was thinking maybe it's not an answer, but your question about all becoming one, and is that a bad thing? For some reason, what's happening in Canada with schools, where they took all the Indian children and said, you know, you're going to learn Western languages and all this stuff. Maybe that's an example, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and the idea of superiority of one group over another, they have more resources or power, and so there's no equality or mutual respect, it's just supremacy of one group.
Right, so Sharon says unity doesn't mean that we don't have differences of opinion and different ways of seeing things. And then sometimes unity is based on superiority, or a dominant group wanting to control everything, like the example Joe used of
The government.
Yeah.
the indigenous groups wanting to speak their language. Then we're going to take their children and we're going to make them just like us. We're going to make them in our dominant culture's image.
Yeah.
But I mean, even in a congregational context, right? I mean, there's tension between, can we be together as a Christian community? Do we have to think alike about all things?
And we don't.
And we don't. And so, you know, someone recently told me, oh, you know, there's some things I don't agree with that are going on here at Salem, but I can compartmentalize those things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so sometimes people can't, right?
Right.
That issue is so important to them that it trumps all the other issues, and no, I can't stay in community if there are people who are thinking or acting in such a way. I would contend that our community is not united in what we think about in terms of, especially politically, right?
Yeah.
We can be on the right or the left or the middle, or we don't give a hoot. But what keeps us together, what holds us together is Jesus Christ. That's what holds us together. You know?
That's what should hold us together.
That's what should hold us together, and that's what I think folk need to be. I hope we remind them enough of that. And I don't want this to be a big echo chamber where everyone thinks alike on all political and cultural and societal issues, because I think that can be dangerous then. But if we can show the society that we can be together in community despite our diversity, right? Despite our diversity. Now I know that gets tricky with language, because we did it ourselves, as most of us here, if you scratch most of us, we're from German stock, right? Or Lutherans, and you throw in all the Scandinavians, right? When we came to this country, we worshipped in our native language. We worshipped in our heart language. It made perfect sense, right? And we know that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, I think about just, so the Salem community began in late 1849, built the church in June of 1850, or finished building it in 1850, in Blessed, and by around the time of the end of the Civil War, we were worshiping in English. Why? Because the men and women were marrying non-German speaking people. In fact, even that June of 1850 service, they had a German, right?
Yeah.
German and
Yeah.
English were spoken at that
Yeah.
that dedication
Yeah.
service.
Well, wasn't it like 1901, Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, or 1899, that they finally stopped doing a German service?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
when Dr. Abram died, he was the
Right.
last one
Yeah.
conducting it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, with the German services.
So down the street, there is a community called Mountain of God. It's a Lutheran community. It's comprised of mostly people from West Africa. Surprise, surprise, they're worshiping mostly in French and some English and some tribal languages, because these people are coming there, that's their heart language, right? You know, and there's, right, I mean, the Latino congregations are doing the same thing, and what will happen in time is the same thing will happen to them that happened to Salem. Their folk will intermarry, and someone's going to say, well, you know, man, I'm not going to some service where I don't understand the language that's being spoken. Let's go to an English-speaking service. And they'll probably have English services too, and so forth.
The difference is, these people all started out unified. They all started out as one group. It wasn't somebody coming into their group.
Right, but their motivation was for, it seems to be this arrogant power thing they were after. But there's always a tension there that we welcome diversity, but we understand that that's, right, that can get tricky, because you bring in newcomers, you bring in new disciples, and guess what? They have maybe, well, why are we doing this that way? Why can't we do it this way, right? And you bring in new ideas and such. But I believe that a biological principle that I learned in college was that, and it's almost paradoxical, that unity is grounded in diversity. So take, for example, the unity of a forest. The healthy forests are filled with diverse trees, right? Monoculture can get us into trouble, right? If all we do is plant Dutch elm trees through a city, right? Oops, right? And the disease comes along. The same with what we're doing in, to some extent in agriculture, in by having these massive plantings of wheat in certain states, or it's corn and soybeans, as opposed to a diversity. So, I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I was just thinking that even though they all spoke the same language, doesn't mean they all thought the same way.
Sure, right. But it brings up that tension between unity and diversity. Yeah, and a community, I mean, one of the reasons God calls us into community is we can do things together that we cannot do by ourselves. It's very, very plain, very simple. Together we can do things that as individuals it's impossible for us to do. And that's one of the beautiful things about community. And I think most of us, I know there's some people that are introverts and they can just stay at home in their bathrobes and their slippers for the rest of their lives. And I know a few of our high school kids, they were totally cool with remote learning, the online stuff, because they didn't want to go to school and be bullied or be surrounded by these immature, stupid classmates, right? I'll stay at home. But we know most children really ached for that relationship and all. And again, we're all different on that score too. So let's sum up Genesis 1 to 11. Just take a breather here before we get into 12. So kind of consider Genesis chapters 1 to 11 just for a minute. One of the recurrent themes, of course, in chapter 1, it's almost like a litany out of a worship service. And God saw that it was good. And God saw that it was good. 7 times that exact phrase appears. Or actually 6 times, and the 7th is slightly different. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good. It was very good. We then, something goes wrong, right? Something goes wrong. That's the story of Adam and Eve. And we know that is a story that, it's not some kind of historical thing. It's a metaphor for us to just kind of get our heads around, but that we humans misuse our freedom. We misuse the God-given freedom that we have, and we still do, of course. And then we even get the story where Cain killing his brother Abel. And things get so bad, and God kind of, goes off the reservation, so to speak, and we have the flood, right? And then God almost repents of that, right? That God is not going to destroy creation and the whole human adventure. God rejects destruction, complete destruction, annihilation, as the means to accomplish reformation. And so God graciously chooses probably the more difficult, the more vulnerable, long-term engagement, working from within the very life of the world itself. We see in chapter 10 and 11 the world continues to live and breathe and to establish families and communities and nations because God made a grace-filled, unconditional commitment. God made an unconditional commitment to stay with the world. What may happen with that, even in the face of human sinfulness, God is sticking with the world. And that commitment, we're going to see in chapter 12, becomes evident in a whole new strategy that God comes up with. That God's going to work through one family. God's going to work through one family and save and bless all families through that one family. So we are about to launch into what's called the Abraham cycle. Did I write that on the board? Yes, I did. The Abraham cycle. So we're going to pick up chapter 11, verse 27, and this is going to run all the way through chapter 25. Remember, there's 50 chapters in Genesis. And what's really going to kind of come out, and today we'll talk more about call, was this idea of call, this idea of faith, this important idea of divine promise or covenant, and lots of drama. Lots of drama. Lots of drama. Yep. Let's pick up here. Would someone, or we can share too, you don't have to read through the whole thing. So we want to pick up at 11:27 and read through 12. It's like if you want to stop at 12:9, you can, and maybe somebody can pick it up. Would somebody like to start us off? Share, you want to, at 11:27?
Now these are the descendants of Tara. Tara was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haram was the father of Lot. Haran died before his father Tara in the land of his birth in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Ishka. And now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, that sounds good too, to the oak at Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages toward the Negev. Okay. Now
You want to keep going?
I'm-
Yeah, please.
Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to reside there as an alien, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know well that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared on your account." I certainly hope she liked her husband. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. When the officials of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for his sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female slaves, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and be gone." And Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning him, and they sent him on his way with his wife and all that he had.
Okay, thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Guy, too, for being read too. So now, so you can see when, like exactly when did this take place, what's the historical context and all, and that gets pretty tricky. And I want to read from this theological introduction, because I thought this so concisely sums up this issue. The authors write, "One theological issue raised by this absence of a clear historical context is that involving the authority of the biblical text. In the case of like the Psalms, the primeval history, and these family stories," so we're in the family stories now, "the authority of the text does not derive from its role as reporter of either events or history." Let me read that again. "The authority of the text, the biblical text, does not derive from its role as a reporter of either events or history. Instead, the text presents poetry and prose that later religious communities, you and me, and our foremothers and forefathers, have found not only useful, but essential for providing guidance about their own lives. What we would call the canon, C-A-N, one N-O-N, authority, right? Or what's the normative authority. The stories in Genesis 12 to 50 become canon even though they had no firm anchor in specific historical waters." Wasn't that a cool imagery, right? Even though they don't have any anchor, right, in these specific historical waters, they become authority for us. I just thought that was important to take that aside, okay? We're in that same, I've told that story probably so many times you're tired of hearing it, but I'll get to the bottom line. We're not talking about history, right? Historical truth. We're talking about theological truth, God's truth. And that, because if we tie everything that it's got to be historically true, we are in deep, deep trouble. We're standing on a platform that's going to collapse under us. Okay, just wanted to mention that. Okay. The Negev today we would call the Negev, which is the Negev. Be there. And you know how Israel, it has that triangle that comes down to the south? This is the area we're talking about, that southern triangle. It's very desert-like, very, very deserty. In verse 10, "Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt." What's that remind you of, or foreshadows?
Joseph.
Yeah, there we go, the Exodus story. But go back here to a minute. So, man, we come right out of the chute with the chapter 12. God said, whoa, right? God's speaking to Abram. And later in verse 7, so he built there an altar. Okay, who's got the good memory? Who was the first one to start worshiping God and building an altar? Remember?
Abel.
Close.
Cain,
right. You wouldn't think it was Cain, right? So the Lord who had appeared, built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Not only talked, heard, but appeared. So I ask you, my dear friends, what is a call? So we talk about this is the call to Abram from God. What is a call?
God wanting you to do something specific.
God wanting you to do something specific. Do you think a call always is like this, where you're hearing God's voice or even God's appearing to you?
It could happen in a
No,
dream.
no.
It could be just mulling around in your brain until the whole thing becomes odd, I'm thinking. Or I could come in a dream.
Could it be a
Dream,
feeling?
dreams, visions. You can
Feeling.
certainly think of Isaiah.
Could it be a feeling?
A feeling?
Circumstances.
What?
Circumstances.
Circumstances.
When you're thrown into a situation that you didn't want, but there it is.
Okay.
And then you get the courage to continue with whatever it is that you feel like you need to do.
Circumstances, events, feelings, our mind, our reason. It's it's a really Lutheran. It's a deep Lutheran principle. This that Luther talked often about vocare, which is from the Latin voice. Call. And Luther would maintain that we all have a call. Now in our parlance, right, in our Lutheran way of speaking, our vocabulary, we speak of, we're going to vote to call our pastor, or call a new pastor, right? I probably have told this story, but I'll tell it again. So when I was in seminary, they were always, the first couple weeks it seemed, we would gather together often as classmates. There were about 30 of us, and they would go around and they would make us tell our call story. Tell us your call story, how you're here. We got to the point where we heard our call stories so much, I started saying, why don't we trade call stories? I'll tell Sharon's, and Guy, you tell Jane's, and Jane will tell Coray's, and this is fun. Because you heard the other, everybody had their own story. And they were all just what you guys are talking about. Circumstances, events, feelings, your mind, just all kinds of things that went into that. To say, yeah, I feel that I'm being called to pursue ordained ministry. But as Luther would say, that we're also being called to teach, maybe to be a professional teacher, to be a scientist, right? To go and serve in the armed forces, to be an accountant. We could go on and on. I think one of the ingredients to know then, to discern your call, because that's the biggie, right? Discerning your call, is does it give you joy? And are you good at it? Right? And they're tied together. Now maybe there's some people who are so clueless that they're doing something that they're not good at, but it's bringing them joy. But I think that's an extreme minority. I serve on the Delaware-Maryland Candidacy Committee. And at the beginning of the process, our job is to listen to the call stories of people coming to our committee and saying, I have a call from God to serve usually either as a parish pastor or as what's called a deacon. The distinction is a pastor does word and sacrament, a deacon does word and service. So they don't have the sacramental responsibilities. What I listen for and what I will challenge them over is, to me, there are two aspects of every call from God. The first is an internal, which I think a lot of you hit that note on there. You have to have some fire in your belly if you're going to be an architect or a dancer or a parish pastor. You got to have some fire in your belly. which also means you gotta know something about what is ahead of you, to be able to discern that. The second piece is an external affirmation, I know from my personal experience, I spent many years working, I spent 26 years working for the federal government. But way before I took advantage of an early retirement at the tender age of 49 to leave, I had people say to me, "Oh, Dave, if you ever get the chance to leave, you would be a great parish pastor. You should really do it." Which kind of played with my head, It was like, I don't know. In fact, I will tell you, I left Philadelphia when how old was I? I was 29 when I moved from Philadelphia, and I went to, still working for Social Security in Frederick. And one day I get a phone call from a pastor in Philadelphia who was a member of our congregation, but he worked for the national church, and his job was missions, and he was all over the country. He said, "Hey, I'm going to be down in Frederick. I'm going to be over at the evangelical congregation. I want to meet with you." His name was Fulmer Farstrup. That's not from Nebraska, right?
Oh.
Fulmer, Folmer, Farstrup. And he looked like a farmer. He was a huge guy. He was, these hands like hams, and it was a really neat guy. Anyway, so he comes down and we go to lunch over at Dolly's, that was there on East Street, and he says to me, "You should leave and go to seminary and become a parish pastor." I thought this guy was nuts. I just moved from Philadelphia to, not start over again, but, this new adventure down back in Maryland. But those kind of things kept happening to me over and over and over again, to the point that eventually, and then that internal thing started. So it's got to be both, I feel, that people need to say, "Oh my goodness, you have a wonderful way with children, you would be a great teacher. Oh my goodness, your artwork is just fabulous. Man, you should go down to Micah and study, and pursue this. I think you've got the gift." And right, music, we could go on and on, right? That people need encouragement. And I think God calls us sometimes to encourage folks, and whatever that might be, to pursue that talent. So one of the questions we can think about as this story progresses is, what is it about Abram that God singles him out? And as Frederick Buechner would say, when God calls you, your troubles have just begun. Right? When God calls you, your troubles have just begun. Anybody want to maybe talk about your calls, or your whole experience with this thing, or helping somebody discern a call?
Not mine, but Elizabeth, we all remember Elizabeth Peter, who is now Elizabeth Peter Ekman. She is Vicar Jay's wife, and she's now an ordained pastor. She made a little video for the church, which gave her initial call, church in Pennsylvania. And it was surprising to me. It's about 4 minutes, and she talks about her call. And it's just going through my mind as you speak. She says when she was, I think she was in production in TV in Harrisburg, and over again, people on the staff would come to her with help with their problems. And it just seemed to be something she was doing, and people were drawn to her with that skill and insight. And that is her call, not some miraculous, lightning storm or something, out in a cornfield. We had a pastor once that happened then. And it was interesting to me that would be her introduction to this congregation that's online. It's wonderful to see, and I'm sure she's doing a wonderful job there. So, but that was, there's exactly what you're talking about.
Can't you be born into Lutheranism? Can't you be born into Lutheranism?
I feel like
Well, I think
Once you're a Lutheran, you're just.
I think you can be born into the tradition like any of the traditions. Roman Catholicism, Methodism? Well, what's your point? What do you mean to be?
Well, I've always been a Lutheran. My family has been
Yeah.
Lutheran, so it's just, I
Yeah.
wouldn't consider it.
So that, saying that it was almost, well, that kind of brings up, okay, so if you're born into it, did it choose you rather than you chose it? Because a call has a sense of us choosing, even though it might be of God and the spirits behind it and pushing us and the external affirmation. But, you know, can we be chosen as, you know, where does being chosen and being called, what, you know, that, how's that
Yeah.
rub up against each other? I mean, can you be chosen against your will? I don't know.
Yes.
I remember, yeah, like being drafted into the army. It was a kind of a bittersweet moment. I remember one of our classmates near the end of the first semester, decided to drop out of seminary. Young pipeliner, had come right from college, real good-looking young guy. And he put it very succinctly. He said, I've learned in this first semester that to be an effective parish pastor, loving Jesus is not enough.
Oh, that's probably true.
Loving Jesus is not, you know, you gotta, it's a lot more than just loving Jesus, or we all could do it, right? And I thought that was, and it was kind of poignant, of course, you know what I mean, that he was deeply disappointed, and I always wonder, I never lost track of him what happened, but, you know, I'm sure whatever he did, he would be a blessing. So, I mean, never for a moment think, oh my gosh, you know, you gotta be a pastor or a deacon or some professional religious person to be, you know, to be contributing to the Lord. As you know, this congregation rests on the laity, right? I mean, it would collapse overnight if everyone stopped doing all the work they're doing. You know what I mean? It really,
Yeah, it's really true.
you know, our jobs as pastors are really to lead, to help impart a vision, right? And we, you know, and that's an unusual thing in a society. We work for you, we are your employees, but at the same time, we lead you, right? That's kind of a interesting, right? Interesting relationship there. So, well, thank you. Yeah. Now, how about our friend Sarai here, Sari? Oh, well, we haven't really. Hold on a minute. Let's hold on to that a minute. We haven't really gotten to her. Well, yes, we did. I'm sorry. Yeah, in Egypt here. So now, what do you think about her situation? So I'll pose this question: is she a commodity?
Absolutely.
I hope not.
Yeah, Kat said absolutely. We hope not, but.
In this situation, she is.
Or am I looking at it like a 21st century lens here and saying, well, you know, here's the woman who is making a sacrifice for the success of her husband, right? That she's, you know, she's doing this for him.
But for both of them.
For both of them, okay, there's a way to look at it.
Still, that would certainly have a bad effect on her.
In those days, it meant nothing.
Right?
And her husband had already told her what to do. You're gonna tell them, we're not married, you're just my sister. So he knew what he was saying. He was looking for a nice, comfortable way out too.
He wanted to
He
stay
was-
alive as well.
He was protecting himself.
Yeah.
He was protecting himself
Right.
so he doesn't get killed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, is he a moral sleazebag?
No, it's just the way it was. That was
All right.
the
A
times.
pragmatic way to look at it, right? That he's, he fears that he's going to be killed if he says that he's her husband.
But that's not true, because once they found out, they didn't kill him.
Yeah, but what had happened when they
Yeah,
found out? There was this plague that came in. Interesting, in the Quran, the Muslim interpretation of this, the plague is impotence for the Egyptians. Yeah, the plague is impotence, which is why they were quick to, and
Well, then the guy upheld the morality.
and here's the, well, and that they never touched her. They never, she was never, violated or, that's additional stories that they have in their religious writings and their midrash. But, okay, I'm sensing that maybe he's not a moral sleazebag, but he's being pragmatic, he's doing the right, if he's gonna be the bearer of this promise, this call, he's gotta stay alive, right?
Yeah, but he needs to have a wife.
And he needs to have a wife, well,
Well, you staying alive is a little more important, I think.
so it all turns out okay, right? I mean, it all,
Because
He got kicked out.
yeah,
He got
yeah, but
kicked
what does he
out.
leave with?
Everything.
Well, a lot of stuff.
He's
yeah.
loaded.
Yeah, he's loaded. but-
And what's that remind you of again? Right? The Israelites are hightailing it out of Egypt under Moses' command, and they're loaded with stuff, right? It's an interesting, how that is the same. So he profits big time. Pharaoh, again, a foreshadow, is the big loser in this. Okay, can we go on and read? Should we stop here and pick up at 13 and 14 next time? Or what do you want to do? Because we are kind of at an hour. Maybe that would be good to do. We're not, this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? Right? Genesis is a marathon, not a sprint. So maybe we'll stop right here. So that means next time, and we will meet, where's my handy dandy Linda Whalen? Of course, now I've misplaced it, Linda.
Well, it's
But-
November 22nd.
Thank you.
Thanksgiving week.
Linda gave me this little calendar, and I even had it this morning, and now who knows what I did with it in all these books. But anyway, so next time is November the 22nd. Does that sound good? 1 p.m., same time, same place? For you online folk, that means it's probably going to pop up on the 23rd.
Okay, if I buzz in from the beach.
I'm sorry,
I'll be at the beach.
you'll be at the beach.
Yeah,
Which beach?
Bethany.
Bethany. Oh, I just came back from Bethany.
Kathy, my favorite place.
Yeah, it was a beautiful. Whoa.
Oh, you had a beautiful
Well, we
weekend.
were down there, it was something,
Yeah.
we should have bathing suits on. So,
67.
the 22nd, we'll pick up at chapter 13, so let's do 13, 14. Now in 15, we really get in there, because we have the, 15, we have the covenant, the promise with Abraham. Why don't we read through 17? We may not make it. We'll start with 13, and we'll see if we can get to 17. Okay? All right, well again, thank you for those who are going to be watching this recording. Thank you for all these wonderful participants and readers. I pray a blessing upon the rest of your day and our day too. Take care, God bless.
Okay.